Hello, my name is Skylar Rose, and today I will be telling two of my favorite myths to come out of the West. The first being the emergence story of the Navajo, called Dine Bahane, which has two parts. The first being a tale of a man and how the world and its inhabitants came into being, with the second being of an epic of two young demigods and their quest to protect those they love and rid the world of evil. The second myth will be that of the Lakota. This myth is called White Buffalo Calf Woman, also known to the Lakota people as Ptesanhui. This myth takes place long after the Earth's creation, but still long before the changing of the times we are accustomed to today. The story of Ptesanhui prophesizes the returning symbol to tell of the coming peace on Earth, and is still looked for today. We begin in the first world, Niho, or the Black World. The first world was small, and black as soot, an island surrounded by four great seas, and was the realm of the air spirit people, which are now commonly described as various types of bugs. Over each of the four seas there was a cloud, white, black, yellow, and blue, each with their own ruler. In the east there was a big water creature, the south ruled over by a blue heron, the north was white thunder, and to the west a frog. There came a time where the black and white clouds came together and a man was born. He came to be known as Yebeka. And on the other side of the island, the yellow and blue cloud came together, and so was the first woman brought into existence, and she was called Yibaad. One night, Yebeka had made a fire, and it was seen by Yibaad from the other side of the island. Yibaad set out to find the fire that night, but could not. And 3 nights passed, and Yibaad searched for the fire, and finally on the 4th night she had found him. Yebeka greeted her and welcomed her into his camp, and such is the tradition now, where the woman goes off from her home and lives with the man. The two lived in peace for some time, but then a trickster coyote named Natautse Maai, known as First Coyote, was born in the waters and came up to Yebeka and told him that he knew all that was under the waters and all that was within the skies. And the first man believed him. And a second coyote came along called Autse Hashke, which in the Lakota language means first angry. And he told them that they were not the first people, but he was. And he comes to be known as the bringer of witchcraft into the world today. But as time passed, the air spirit people became jealous and reckless from the new tricksters, and argued constantly amongst each other. The rulers of the 4 seas could not stand it any more, and they told the beings of the island that they must leave this world. Many of the air spirit people and the first man, woman, and 2 coyotes left by climbing in a hole into the sky, into the second world. And thus begins the story of the emergence into the second world, or Niho, or the blue world. Once through to the second world, they found many beings already living here. Many were represented by birds. This was the realm of the mighty swallow people. The newcomers were greeted and welcomed to this plain, and for 23 days all lived in peace and harmony. But on the 24th night of that, the air spirit people tried to sleep with the wife of the swallow chief. And the next morning the swallow chief told the newcomers, "We welcomed you here among us. We treated you as kin. Yet this is how you return our kindness. Now you must leave this world." And yet again the newcomers set a search for a tear in the sky, and with the help of Niltisi, the wind god, they found the hole in the sky and climbed into the next realm. And thus the first people were brought into Nihatso, the third or yellow world. This was the last great realm before coming to the world we know today. And there were 2 great rivers that crossed at a holy point, joining the 4 corners of the universe. And in the yellow world there are 6 holy mountains that were recreated later in the 4th world that we live in today. And holy people lived among the mountains. They were immortal and could travel the land by following a path of the rainbow and rays of the sun. These holy inhabitants are the four spirit man gods of the Navajo religion. There was Yebitzai the white, talking god of the Navajo people, Tonanili the blue, rain god, Hastahogan the yellow, household god, and Hastetzini the black or fire god. It would be important to note that many of the Navajo deities are never personified or impersonated out of respect. Therefore, the vagueness of their appearances must be observed. Also among the holy people was Turquoise Boy and White Shell Girl, who were Nadlehe, who are semi-holy and without gender. They were the guardians of the male and female reeds. Eventually, the four holy people called upon Yabeka and Yaba'ad to visit, and they did not speak to each other until the fourth day of visiting. The black god said, "You must cleanse yourselves, and we will return in 12 days." So the first man and woman bathed themselves carefully and dried themselves with cornmeal and waited for their return. Upon the return of the holy people, Tonanili and Hastetzini came carrying a sacred buckskin, and Yabetsai came with 2 perfect ears of corn. They placed the buckskin on the ground facing west, and on it placed the 2 ears of corn, under each placed an eagle feather, and told the 2 newcomers to stand back and to let the wind enter. And then a great wind blew through to the buckskin. Each of the holy people walked around the buckskin 4 times, and the feathers began to move. It was this way that they turned Yabeka and Yaba'ad from spirit people into human beings with great powers. And so began the population of the human race. One day, after years of peace, Yabeka brought home a deer he had killed. Yaba'ad greeted him back home with sarcasm. She boasted of women's importance and how they gather and till the fields. "We have no need of men," said Yaba'ad. And Yabeka grew very angry, and gathered the other men, and went to live across the river to boast that it was men who did not need women. The men took with them grinding stones, bowls, blankets, axes, and hoes that they had invented, and called back to the women, taunting them with the tools the men had made, and the women would need to gather the fields. 4 years had passed as the genders lived apart. It was during this time that the women harvested less and less because they had no tools to till the fields, while men grew more and more, but each group longed for each other. Some women sought to satisfy themselves with bird feathers and bones or long stones. These unnatural acts led to the displeasure of the spirits and disrespected the holiness of the land that they tilled. And such, each woman that attempted to satisfy herself with any of these odd items gave birth to a monster, and these alien or evil spirits came to be known as the Anaye. One woman used a stag horn and gave birth to the Anaye de Elgith, an enormous stag. Another woman, who used a clump of bird feathers, gave birth to the Anaye called the Thunderbirds. Many more came into this world with these unnatural acts, and were cast away with fear into the shadows. The people of the land grew to feel the shifting of the world with these evil presences, and Yabeka called across the river to Yaba'ad. "We should not be alone. No good can come from this. I no longer feel I can live without you. I am sorry I let the things you said make me angry." The men gathered and spoke amongst each other, and agreed to call out to the women across the river to join together once more. Then the men built a raft and sent it across the river for the women. The men and women then bathed and dried themselves in cornmeal and waited until nightfall. Then they could resume their lives together once again. Dusk came, and the women climbed onto the raft and set course for the other side of the river. But a mother and 2 daughters had been in the fields and not seen the raft. Now it was much too dark, and all they could see were the other women crossing the river on the raft. They began to swim across the river, hoping to catch up to the other women. Suddenly, Unktehi, the great water spirit, grabbed the 2 daughters and dragged them to her home under the water. For 3 days and nights, the other women and men searched for the 2 daughters, but to no avail. On the 4th morning, the gods Tonaneli and Yabetsai appeared with a large bowl made of white shell and another of blue shell. They placed the bowls on the river banks and began spinning the bowls. The water of the river split in two, giving way to a house on the river's floor. Yebeka and Yeba'ad walked down to the house, and behind them crept the trickster, Altsehashke. They went into the first room to find the monster Unktehi asleep, and her own two daughters, and the two missing daughters as well. Yebeka and Yeba'ad each grabbed one of the missing daughters and fled from the house before Unktehi could wake, and behind them Altsehashke carried the children of Unktehi hidden in his great fur coat. The next morning, many different animals began running past the village of the first people from the east, fleeing from something. After 3 days of thousands of animals running by, the people of the village sent locusts to the east to see what was the matter. The locusts returned, telling of a great wall of water coming from the east, and a tide of water from the north and south as well. They warned of the anger of Unktehi at the loss of her daughters, and thus the first people were forced to flee. The first people ran to the holy mountain of the west, and Yebeka ran to each of the other sacred mountains, gathering soil from each to summon the 4 holy people. Turquoise Boy came bearing the great male reed, and Yebeka planted it atop the mountain. All the people of the first village began to blow on the reed, and it began to grow and grow until it reached the canopy of the sky. A woodpecker then carved a hole for the people to climb into the reed, and the people and the 4 holy ones climbed up until they came out into the 4th world, escaping the wrath of Unktehi. But in their haste, the people of the first village forgot about the reed, and soon after their escape, followed the terrible Anaye. Having escaped Unktehi, the people rejoiced, and the 4 holy ones decided to make home in this new realm alongside the first people. With all Yebeka's heroic deeds seen by the holy ones, he was granted the honor of becoming the sun-bearer. Bringing light to this new 4th world, he would forever gallop across the sky on his blue steed, wearing the sun as his shield. Yebeka grew in favor of the other holy ones, as well as the people of the first village, and grew to become the most important male deity in Navajo religion, the mythological equivalent of Zeus, Apollo, and Cronus combined. And as the sun-bearer, he brought life and prosperity to the nature and created most of the big game that the Navajo hunt through time. Yebeka came to be known as Tsohanohai. From then on, he lived in a turquoise palace at the end of the sky with his wife, Yeba'ad. As Tsohanohai grew and explored his power, he watched over the village of the New World. He saw happiness and peace within the village, but his heart grew heavy as he had watched the people being attacked from the outside by the terrible Anaye. He watched as the Anaye killed many of the villagers and called out to the 4 holy ones in hopes of advice. Early that same morning, Tsohanohai saw the light of a fire on a mountain, and he said to his wife, "Someone is there. I must go to them." But Yeba'ad begged and pleaded for him to stay up in the sky with her where it is safe, away from all of the Anaye. But on the 4th day, seeing the same fire on the mountain, he said, "I must go. I believe there is a holy person on that mountain who can help us." And he set off for the mountain through a wild storm, reducing his ability to see, even with the light of the sun. Just as Tsohanohai reached the summit, he heard an infant crying and a crash of thunder. Suddenly the storm had cleared, and a rainbow appeared, and light came through the clouds again. He found an unfamiliar woman standing in front of him. He did not recognize her as a villager of the first people, nor had he heard of any such woman described by any of the holy ones. Tsohanohai is instantly struck with love and approached the woman. She tells him her name is Istanatlehi, and she becomes to be known as the Changing Woman. The two quickly fall in love, and Tsohanohai visits her in secret. On the 4th day of visiting, Istanatlehi becomes pregnant and decides to move to the village of the first people to raise the children. With the magical power of the new god Tsohanohai and the mystic spirit of Istanatlehi, they quickly gave birth to 2 sons, who grew into adulthood in only 8 days. These sons were called Nyanasgeni, the monster slayer, and Tobadzatsini, born of water. The two sons grew strong, and feeling the unique power within them, came to wonder of their origins. They came to their mother inquiring about their father. She informed them that in order to defeat the Anaye and their chief, Yetso, they needed special weapons that only their father, Tsohanohai the Sun Bearer, could provide. And thus the twin brothers set out on a journey to find their father and destroy the terrible Anaye. On their way to find their father, Nyanasgeni and Tobadzatsini reached a stretch of desert. They soon noticed puffs of smoke, and upon closer inspection they found this was coming from the lair of the spider goddess known as Nasteetstan. She welcomed the twin brothers and assumed the form of an elderly woman. In addition to giving them rest and food, she told them that she knew about their plans to rid the world of the menace of the Anaye, and she revealed that she existed in the world before them, and actually was the mother of the chief Anaye called Yetso. She warned them of the power and perils that they would face on their quest, and as a final gift, she gave each of them 2 eagle feathers of the Wanable'e Galeshka, the spotted eagle and companion to the great spirit Wakantanka, to wear in their headbands. One feather was to make them virtually invincible, and the other that would lull opponents into meek submission. As the twin brothers journey westward, they did indeed encounter each of the perils told to them by Nasteetstan. First they traveled across miles of deserts and boiling quicksand, but with protective feathers they could keep going even when the sand was far above their head. Next they passed through a dense forest of cacti, and although rooted to the ground, the cacti could reach out to grab the brothers. But again, with the feathers in their headband, they passed through with the determination of finding their father and stopping the Anaye. Lastly, the brothers found themselves at a canyon that was said to contract upon travelers once inside and crush them. With their mighty strength and fortitude, and the gifts of the spider goddess, they passed through, eventually groping their way free. Once through the canyon, the brothers came upon an ocean as the final leg of their journey, before reaching their father's house at the far end of the sky. With their magical feathers, they were able to walk upon water and continued on for days. At last, the brothers came upon the glistening turquoise palace of their father. Upon entering the palace, they beheld the sun god's court, with Nandadzgazi, the god of daybreak, Chanahailu, the god of nightfall, as well as 2 spirit wives of Tsohanohai. The 2 brothers greeted the gods and awaited their father's return at nightfall. The brothers greeted Tsohanohai upon return, but the sun god did not recognize the 2 as his sons and grew suspicious. He declared that if they truly were his sons, then they would have to pass a test before seeking his aid. First, he impaled the brothers with stalagmites, and then again with the peaks of mountains. The boys endured this several hours without crying out for pain. Next, Tsohanohai subjects the twins to the hottest sweat lodge his wives can muster, and the twins survive this ordeal with the help of Niltsi, the wind god. Next, Tsohanohai tries to poison them with the deadly tobacco from his turquoise pipes. But Yebetsai, the talking god, spoke to them through a caterpillar and warned them how to survive the smoke. At last, satisfied that these 2 were in fact his sons, Tsohanohai called for great celebration in honor of them. The next day, Tsohanohai takes his sons and opens the eastern wall to a field of limited horses. The sons refuse them. Then he takes them to the southern door and opens it, revealing a mountain of fine clothing. They refused this in turn. Then he took them to the western wall and opened a door revealing miles and miles of jewels and turquoise. Again they refused his gifts. And lastly, he took them to the north wall and showed them all the animals desired by hunters, and they refused him again. Then Tsohanohai asked the brothers what it was they would ask of him. The brothers asked for weapons for which to wage war against the Anaye and save their people. So Tsohanohai gave his first son, Nayanaskeni, the unbreakable bow and quiver of an inexhaustible supply of lightning arrows. Then he gave Tobaratsini a knife made of petrified sunlight, and to test his weapon, Nayanaskeni fired an arrow at the far-off Tzotzil mountain, which comes to be known as Mount Taylor today. And the lightning bolt struck with such a force that it formed a large cleft that remains in the mountain of the body today. Satisfied with these new weapons, the brothers set off to battle the Anaye. As daybreak arrived, Tohanohai grabbed his shield, which was the sun, and mounted his sky-blue horse with his sons, and rode off to the palace, which magically emerged them on the eastern side of the world, as was the beginning of the sun god's daily journey. Tohanohai was traveling with his sons, and they saw the great traveling water serpent, the Anaye spawn of Unktehi of the third world. The twin brothers then dismounted and departed their father, landing on the summit of a mountain. They began to pursue the great water serpent for days, never ceasing battle. They chased the serpent, firing upon her for days at a time, and with each strike laid upon the serpent, its scales began to fall. And as the scales fell behind the great beast, they formed the many freshwater lakes and streams found across the world. With the never-ending battle continuing on, the chase began to exhaust the young heroes, and they devised a plan to try to trick the great beast. Tobad Stazzini ran ahead of the beast, and with his wit and the help of his magical gift from the spider goddess, he began to reason with the water serpent. He began to calm the great beast, and complimented her resolve and stamina throughout the great battle. After hours of discussion, it was found that the battle had come to an end, and the brothers had tamed the once terrible water serpent, spawn of Unktehi. And instead of continuing on as an evil, destructive force against the world, they turned her into a benevolent deity of fresh water. She came to be known as Tianotsodi, and thus gained a powerful ally and foe slain. The brothers continued on their quest to slay all of the Anaye. There was De'elgith, the cloud swallower, an antelope stag that grew infinitely as he ate, and such his domain became desolate, devoid of all plant and animal life. But with all that he ate, he grew to reach the clouds and began to eat these as well. De'elgith's size proved to be a great challenge, but was eventually slain by a Nayas Nagini, tunneled underneath the beast, and shot an arrow through the underbelly, piercing his heart. And in the throes of death, he devastated the land even further, causing a great tear in the earth, known today as the Grand Canyon. The brothers went on with their magical gifts and killed many of the Anaye. The thunderbirds in the east, with their deafening, storm-calling wings, and the troll monster, Setahotstilhali, who would kick travelers off of a cliff as they passed by his cave. Another was the Anaye known as Binaye Ahani, the gods who killed with lightning in their eyes. Seemingly non-threatening with their stubby arms and legs and a stout body with bulging eyes that were their weapons. These were many of the Anaye slain by the great twin god brothers, but all battles merely trained the brothers for the final fight against the chief Anaye. Traveling south after the battle with the Binyahani, the brothers spotted an enormous figure in the distance. As the two approached, they could see that it was the great chief Anaye, Yetso, god of the Great Salt Lake. The giant was carrying his usual basket of dead victims, and upon coming up a stream, Yetso sat down to devour his victims, and then, as was custom, to drink so deeply from the stream that it would dry up. And this was the reason for much of the area around the Lakota territory being such as a desert, claiming the area used to be full of life-giving streams until Yetso's depredations made it arid. Nayana's Geni attempted to sneak up on the Anaye Yetso, but he saw his shadow and knew he was there. The two foes exchanged taunts and insults, and then the battle ensued, with Yetso armed with his own mighty weapon, a giant club that, when used, was set to tear apart the earth, even through time, creating the world's earthquakes. And it was just then he was saved by the arrival of Tsohanohai, the sun god, along with his heroic brother Tobatsatsini, who Tsohanohai had picked up along the way and was riding behind him on the sky blue horse of the sun god. Tsohanohai announced it was time for this foul beast Yetso to meet his end, and Yetso swung wildly at the sun god, but Tsohanohai's shield, the sun itself, had protected him and Tobatsatsini. Tsohanohai called out to his son to prepare himself for the advantage. Tsohanohai then struck the great giant with the thunderous bolts from his shield, and with Yetso now exposed and vulnerable, Nyanazgeni shot him with 4 lightning bolt arrows in rapid succession, the first causing him to reel back and stumble towards the east, the second causing him to stumble towards the south, and the third causing him to stumble towards the west, and the fourth towards the north. And then Yetso fell to his knees and raised himself partly, but then fell on his face and died, with his limbs facing each of the 4 directions of the universe. Tobatsatsini now used his knife of petrified sunlight to cut off the Anaye chief's head, and threw it far from the giant's body. Blood from the body began flowing like a river towards the head, and Tsohanohai warned the heroic twins that if the blood ever had reached the head of Yetso, he would be revived. And Tobatsatsini now used the knife to gouge long pits in the earth to catch the blood, and these pits became various valleys and canyons throughout the world. Next, the 3 deities tried to transform Yetso's remains into other living things, as Nyanazgeni had done with all of the other slain Anaye, since the myth explains that gods cannot fully be destroyed unless their life force is transformed into something else. Yetso's magic was so strong, however, that in their efforts to transform his body into something else, it only resulted in transforming him into 4 more of the Anaye. But with the slaying of the greatest Anaye and chief, the brothers celebrated and returned home to their mother. The brothers danced with their mother and built her a palace in the eastern end of the sky and rejoiced for the slaying of the greatest of the Anaye, Yetso. But the destruction of the beasts had depopulated the world, and Estanatlehi grew sad with so few people to live in this new world with so little evil. And therefore she brushed white flour and yellow cornmeal from her breasts, and from it molded the figures of a man and a woman. She had left her creations under a magical blanket for 1 night, and then found them alive the next morning. Istanatlehi blessed the pair, and for 4 nights and 4 days they mated, creating the great Navajo nation. Thereafter, Estanatlehi bestowed many blessings among humanity, although 4 of the final Anaye had escaped the deadly weapons of her sons. These were age, winter, famine, and poverty. She allowed those evils to live so that mankind would treasure her gifts all the more. And thus ends the great emergence story of the Navajo people. And now for the myth of the white buffalo calf woman, which is most likely the most famous myth of the Lakota religion. It is a myth of prophecy with the appearance of a spirit that teaches the people many of the rituals they hold sacred today, as well as it tells us of the coming peace between all of mankind and nature. One summer, long ago, the Okshetishakwan, or 7 tribes of the Lakota, came together and camped. Chief Standing Hollowhorn of the Itzapatio sent out 2 scouts in search of food because of the great food shortage. The 2 scouts climbed a tall hill to look over the entire country, and at once, at the top, were approached from a distance by something that appeared to be Wakan, or holy. This Wakan light approached surrounding the most beautiful woman either of them had ever seen, and with her she carried a bundle. One scout desired her sexually and reached out, but this woman was Lila Wakan, and very holy, and not to be disrespected. Lightning then struck the man and reduced him to charred bones. She then turned to the man in front of her and told him, "I am Te San Hui. I bring good news for you and your kin. Go back now, and tell the others to prepare for my arrival, and the news to come." The scout returned to report on the woman, and make preparations, and after 4 days they saw P'teh San Hui approaching from the west, and greeted her into the camp. Upon her arrival, due to the shortage of meat, the only offering to be made was that of water. Chief Hollowhorn dipped some wakanga, or sweetgrass, into a skin bag of water and gave it to her. After the offering, they went inside the tent to see the awakangwanka she had instructed them to build. This was a sacred altar made of red earth with a buffalo skull and a 3-stick rack for the holy thing she was bringing. She then circled the lodge 4 times, as in the manner of Anpetu Hui, the sun, and the 4 holy ones. This represented the circle without end, the sacred hoop, and the road of life. She then presented the people with the chanunpa. She extended it to Chief Standing Hollowhorn, with the stem in her right hand and the bowl in her left, and so is the way the chanunpa has always been held. She then filled it with chanchasha, or red willow bark tobacco, which is also commonly used in the rituals of the chanunpa today. Then she placed a dry buffalo chip into the fire and lit the pipe with it. She told them, "This symbolizes the Peta Oakoshani, the fire without end, the flame to be passed from generation to generation." She also told them that the smoke rising from the bowl was Tunkashila's breath, the living breath of the great-grandfather mystery. P'teh San Hui then showed the people the right way to pray, the right words, and the right gestures. She taught them how to sing the pipe-filling song, and how to lift the pipe to the sky, towards the grandfather, and down to grandmother Earth, Unki, and then to the 4 directions of the universe. P'teh San Hui told the people, "With this holy pipe, you will walk like a living prayer, with your feet resting upon the earth and the pipe stem reaching into the sky. Your body forms a living bridge between the sacred beneath and the sacred above. Wakantanka smiles upon us, because now we are as one, earth, sky, all living things, the 2-legged, the 4-legged, the winged ones, the trees, and the grasses." Along with binding man to nature, the sacred pipe is also something that binds men and women together in a circle of love. It is the only holy object in the making of which both men and women have a hand. The men carve the bowl, and the women take the stem and decorate it with bands of colored porcupine quills, along with the 12 feathers hanging from its neck joint. These feathers are from the Wanable'e Galeshka, the spotted eagle, a very sacred bird, and is known as the Great Spirit's messenger and wisest of all flying ones. The wooden stem of this chanunpa stands for all that grows on the earth, and represents the woman of the Lakota people. And within the bowl are engraved 7 circles of various sizes. They stand for the 7 sacred ceremonies practiced with this pipe, and for the 7 Okseti Shakwin, the 7 sacred campfires of our Lakota nation. The bowl of this pipe itself represents the men of the Lakota people, and the joining of these 2 pieces of the pipe for ceremonies represents the coming together of man and women, as well as the harmony between men and nature. Then P'teh San Hui took the pipe and held it again for the people to see. "Look at this bowl. Its stone represents the buffalo, but also the flesh and blood of the red man. The buffalo represents the universe and all the 4 directions, because he stands on 4 legs for the 4 ages of creation. The buffalo was put into the west by Wakantanka at the making of the world, to hold back the waters. Every year he loses 1 hair, and in every one of the 4 ages he loses a leg. This sacred hoop will end when all the hair and legs of the great buffalo are gone, and the water comes back to cover Yunki, or Mother Earth." And with that she left in the same direction she came. Silhouetted by a red sun, as she went she stopped and rolled 4 times, first transforming into a black buffalo, and on the second roll a brown buffalo, then a red buffalo, and upon the fourth roll she changed into a white buffalo calf. A white buffalo is the most sacred animal one could come across. Then, as she disappeared over the horizon, instantly herds of buffalo appeared. And from that day on, the buffalo furnished the Lakota people with everything they need: meat for food, skin for their clothes and teepees, and bones for their many tools. In the Lakota culture, it is prophesied that the return of the white buffalo calf will signal the beginning of peace throughout the world, and once again man and nature will live in harmony. The Lakota people await today for the coming of another white buffalo calf in hopes that the world will once again come together as one. And with the final words of Ptesanwi, I come to a close. Toksha ake wakinyaktin katelo, which is Lakota for I shall see you again.